Hello and welcome to another episode of the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. We are here live for All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey this afternoon. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel here at the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. These All Fired Up episodes are live every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can also find the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show podcast on Spotify or wherever you do listen to your podcast episodes. And then also, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR, where you won't miss any of my content. You can find all my written work on KentuckySportsRadio.com, part of the On3 Sports Network, there on the Twitter handle as well. So thank you all for tuning in today. Hope to see some comments come into the live chat. Make sure you're using that feature if you are here watching live. If you're watching sometime in the future, please leave a comment. Or as I mentioned, hit me up on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Happy to answer anything there as well. But we stepped our game up a little bit. I think it looks a little better. Got a light up here now. So we're moving into the 21st century of hosting live YouTube shows and podcasts and all that good stuff. And hopefully the product continues to get better as we move along this college basketball season. But what I wanted to do today, as the calendar is about ready to turn from January to February, I wanted to take a step back and look at the Power Six conferences and where those conference races stand as of this morning. This question was brought to me a little bit by a friend, Travis Shoemaker, friend of the program, who was asking me about some quote unquote locks for some betting futures in the conference markets. So I thought, well, this is a good topic for All Fired Up today. So here we are. We're going to dive into where some of these conference races stand. And let's go ahead and dive right into that here on Wednesday, January 31st with the ACC. And we certainly got a little bit of, I don't want to call it upheaval, but we got the ACC became more interesting just in the last about what 17 hours or so from the time we're recording this, because last night North Carolina finally took a loss in the conference. They were 9-0, but they went on the road to Georgia Tech and lost to the Yellow Jackets. And Coach Damon Anderson or Damon Stoudemire. Damon Anderson was my high school math teacher. One other, I think it was, we did AP Physics together. But Damon Stoudemire and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets defeated North Carolina last night, 74-73. Crazy last-second layup for Georgia Tech. And it's interesting. I mean, this is college basketball in a nutshell. It feels like this season. But Georgia Tech has 3 ACC wins this season, 2 of them coming against Duke and North Carolina. Like, if that doesn't scream parity and what we've seen in terms of these top 10 teams losing, top 25 teams losing, all the upheaval towards the top of these conferences, that certainly describes it well. North Carolina was arguably the best team on the road in college basketball this season. They had already won, I believe, 5, maybe just four or 5 ACC road games. Obviously, we're 9-0 overall in the conference, but they took one in the loss column finally last night. They are now just one game ahead of the Duke Blue Devils, who are 7-2 in the conference. And wouldn't you know, we get that rivalry game on Saturday. That one is going to be in Chapel Hill, so North Carolina will have home court advantage for that first matchup. But obviously, as you look ahead, I mean, Saturday's matchup is going to have a lot riding on it in terms of the ultimate ACC standings. Who wins the ACC regular season championship earns the number 1 seed for the postseason tournament, all that good stuff. Looking at the rest of the top of the conference, you have Virginia and Florida State at 6-3, excuse me. Wake Forest at 5-3, NC State at 6-4, then a bunch of teams at 5-5 or worse. So it kind of feels like that top handful is really what you're dealing with at this point, probably through NC State at 6-4. But ultimately, as expected, this is a 2-horse race. It's Duke and North Carolina. To me, the eye test tells you that North Carolina is the better team. I think they will prove that on Saturday, certainly being at home. I think North Carolina is going to bounce back and win that game. But people don't like to give Duke a whole lot of credit just because if you're not a Duke fan, then generally you hate Duke. But I think they deserve a lot of credit for what they've done this year. They're 7-2 now in the conference. Yes, they had that bad home loss to Pittsburgh, but they now have won 3 straight. They went on the road and beat Virginia Tech on Monday night. I thought that was an impressive win. They still have an All-American type guy in Kyle Filipowski. Their freshman guard, Sean Stewart, Jared McCain, all those guys are starting to play at a really high level. Caleb Foster, Tyrese Proctor had a big game recently. So, like, these guys are really starting to round into what we all expected them to be. And at the end of the day, they've won 11 of their last 12 games. So I'm not going to get too bent out of shape about one strange loss. Because let's face it, folks, every single team in the country essentially at this point has a quote unquote bad loss, whether it be a home loss, whether it be a mid major loss, whether it be losing a couple in a row on the road, or maybe getting beat by more than you would expect to get beat by a team on the road. Like, every team has flaws on the resume, every team has a bad loss or two. So I'm going to give Duke a little bit of grace for losing at home to Pittsburgh when they've now gone on the road, won two road games in ACC play since then, won 3 straight, including wins over Clemson and at Virginia Tech. I think that's pretty impressive. And like I said, I think that they continue to move in the right direction. I think they're really good offensively. I think they can really shoot the basketball, which makes them dangerous. But I think North Carolina has one of the most complete rosters in all of college basketball. And if I'm sitting here today and you're asking me for a lock to win one of the major conferences, I'm going to have to feel pretty good about saying that North Carolina is going to win the ACC, because to me, they only have one true competitor. A lot of these leagues, I think we're going to be able to talk about 2, 3, 4 teams that can win the conference. Whereas to me in the ACC, it's pretty much a 2-horse race, and I just think one of the teams is better than the other. Travis, who was kind of the father of this episode, as I said, it was his question that kind of got me on this topic. He's in the comments saying, if Duke wins Saturday, will you switch to them having the better chance of winning the regular season, or do they drop more winnable games to let UNC stay at the top? I think that's a really good question. Looking at their schedule here, I mean, they have Duke has a stretch in mid-February where they have to go to Florida State, to Miami, to Wake Forest, 3 straight games. With the way things have gone in college basketball this season, I just don't see any way they're going to win all 3 of those games. Now, the same probably can be said for North Carolina. Like, do I think that North Carolina is going to, like, the winner of the ACC is probably going to have 3 or 4 losses. That means that each of these teams is going to lose a game outside of their head-to-head, I think. I mean, you're talking about probably 4 or 5, probably at least 4, maybe 5 losses to win any of these leagues, including the ACC, which is probably one of the weaker of the Power Six. But I mean, yes, if Duke goes on the road and wins at North Carolina on Saturday, then you would kind of have to say they're in the driver's seat at that point, because then they still have North Carolina coming to Durham later in the year, which if you go on the road and beat North Carolina, you figure you're probably going to win at home. And so then at that point, if they do drop one, they still have a leg up on North Carolina. So needless to say, I think Saturday, as I mentioned already, has a lot riding on it. I think North Carolina is the better team. I think, especially at home, they're going to take care of business here. I would be much more comfortable betting on North Carolina to win the ACC at this point. But yeah, if you want to kind of buy low on Duke, then maybe you should do it now, because if something happens and they win on Saturday, then to me they're the ones that control their own destiny at that point. I would at least say it that way. Moving on to the Big 12. The Big 12 currently has Houston in the driver's seat at 6-2, but we have a jam-packed group up here at the top. Iowa State and Texas Tech both at 5-2. Kansas at 5-3, who you obviously can never count out. TCU at 5-3 as well. For whatever reason, we just have really unbalanced scheduling in this league at this point. Baylor is 3-3. They've played 2 less games than everyone else, or not everyone else, but a lot of these other teams at this point. So I think that when you look at Iowa State and Texas Tech up there, Iowa State, I think we all thought we're going to be pretty good this year. They're excellent defensively. Texas Tech is a little bit more of a surprise to have them towards the top. Kansas, you always know. Houston, we knew was going to step in and be a contender right away. Baylor is always strong in this league as well. the more I watch Houston, and I know they had to squeak it out against Texas on Monday night. Obviously, that was a game played at the Moody Center in Austin, but I just think this team is really darn good. Again, I like Jamal Shedd. I like LJ Cryer. To me, that lifts the ceiling of this offense higher than the offense of some of Coach Kelvin Sampson's more recent teams at Houston. But they still, like, this isn't just the best defense in college basketball. This is a historically dominant defense. Like, they change the game at all times for 40 minutes when they are on the defensive end of the floor. And I think they're going to be really hard to beat, setting up another huge game, just as we talked about North Carolina and Duke. That one has kind of the rivalry background to it, obviously. And there'll be some other rivalry games, which we'll talk about when we get to the SEC, obviously. But Kansas hosting Houston, I don't want to call it a de facto Big 12 championship game because it's not that. They still play. I mean, the final regular season game of the year in the Big 12 is Houston hosting Kansas. And it wouldn't shock me at all if it comes down to that game. But kind of what we just talked about, and if Houston goes on the road and beats Kansas, they obviously are in the driver's seat. They already have one less loss than the Jayhawks. But if the Jayhawks can take care of home court advantage, which at Allen Fieldhouse happens more times than not, now all of a sudden they're tied with Houston at the top of the conference standings. You got to feel pretty darn good about the Jayhawks. And I think this season, for whatever reason, though I do think some people are kind of slowly coming around to the idea of parity, people are slowly coming around to the idea that it's really hard to win on the road. People are coming around to the idea that teams are going to suffer losses over the course of the season, and you don't have to overreact positively or negatively to any single game. But people still really seem to harp on the weaknesses of any given team as if it's like a sign of personal weakness to give any credibility or praise to a team that, especially, you know, forbid you be a fan of one team and heap any praise on another team. That's just a no-no in 2024. We certainly know that, but people want to focus on Kansas's lack of shooting ability. They want to focus a little bit on their lack of depth. But at the end of the day, yeah, they shoot a low percentage. No, they don't have a large number of shooters, but they're shooting 37% from three-point range, guys. Like, I don't think we can act like that is a massive problem for them. I love that they've started to get more and more minutes for Johnny Furphy, the 6'9" freshman. He has been excellent for them since stepping into a larger role. Kevin McCullough is still having an outstanding season. Obviously, you know what you're going to get pretty much day in and day out from Hunter Dickinson. DeJuan Harris is still one of the best point guards in college basketball. I like this group defensively. I think they are consistent offensively. And I think that their size with Hunter Dickinson inside gives them a different dynamic than what some teams at Houston has been able to dominate defensively this season. The Cougars haven't seen a guy like Hunter Dickinson this season, and I think that's going to be a difference maker for the Jayhawks, and I think that's why ultimately they are still my pick to win the Big 12 if I had to pick a team today. I like that they get Baylor. Well, they still play home and away against Baylor. They get BYU at home. They still play home and away at Kansas State or against Kansas State. They have to go to Texas Tech, which will be a big one. They have to go to Oklahoma, which will be a big one, but they get Texas at home. It's just going to be really interesting to see how some of these races play out, this one in particular. And so far, we've broken down the ACC and the Big 12, and we have de facto February or early February conference championship level matchups with Duke hosting North Carolina and now Kansas hosting Houston. Our two favorites in each of these leagues are going at it this weekend. In the comments, we have a question. Outside of this weekend, does Houston lose two more games? So not counting this weekend. I think that they can lose at Baylor, certainly. They still have to play Texas and Iowa State. Those games are at home, though. Still have to play Kansas one more time. I'm going to say that regardless of what happens this weekend, yes, I think Houston will lose two additional times. And whatever happens this weekend, will be what it is. But yes, I think Houston loses 2 more times this season. Moving on to the Big East, the good old Big East. At the top of this conference currently, we have the defending national champion UConn Huskies at 8-1. Then a little bit of a drop off, 2-game drop off to Marquette and Creighton, each at 7-3. Seton Hall is 7-4. St. John's and Providence each only have 4 losses as well, though they are 5-4. No surprise in terms of who the top 3 teams are, and therefore you can't really be surprised about the order too much either. We all knew UConn was still going to be excellent this season, but a lot of people had smart money on Marquette because they bring back essentially everything from a team that won the league by 2 games last season. But Tyler Kolek has been up and down, to say the least, this year. Has rounded into shape recently, certainly, and is playing like the All-American we expected him to be. Now the Golden Eagles have won 5 straight games, including wins at Villanova last night. They've won against Seton Hall. They went on the road and beat St. John's. They've already beaten Villanova actually twice now, including they've also beaten Creighton. This weekend shouldn't be as big of an issue as these last 2 games that we've really touched on for Saturday, but Marquette is at Georgetown on Saturday, but they still have a trip to UConn. They have to go to Creighton and to Xavier later this season too. To me, Connecticut is obviously in the driver's seat, having already gotten off to an 8-1 start since their loss at Seton Hall to begin Big East play. They're hosting Providence this weekend. To me, I think you're going to see a situation where, just like Marquette won the league by 2 games last year, I think UConn can win the game, or can win the league by a similar margin this year. I still just don't fully buy Creighton. I think that they're too reliant on their big 3, though that big 3 is as good as anybody in the country. And I just love this UConn team. Like I think they legitimately have a real chance to go back to back. You have Donovan Clingan back in the lineup now, doing what he does best on both ends of the floor. Tristan Newton playing like an All-American. I mean, we mentioned this so often on all my platforms, but Stephon Castle back healthy now, playing at a high level. Alex Karaman and Cam Spencer are just lights out from 3-point range, over 40% from 3. This team is deep. They have all the pieces. They have point guard play. They have a big man. They have wing scorers. They have shooters. They defend at a high level. Really, really like this group. It's just hard to, I mean, again, yeah, we're going to keep talking about they're going to lose games. These conferences are too good. There's too much parity. The grind, night in and night out. The difference between team 1 and team 8 is just it's too narrow. So yeah, I don't think UConn's going to run the table in Big East play the rest of the way. Do I think they could have one of the more impressive conference records of Power 6 teams? Probably so, yeah. Because I don't love the bottom of this conference. I think that obviously they've already racked up 8 wins. So could they win the league with like 3 losses? Yeah, I could certainly see that being the case. Moving on to the Big Ten. Currently, right now in the Big Ten, you have Wisconsin on top at 8-1. In the league, you have Purdue at 8-2. Purdue plays this evening against Northwestern, a team that knocked them off earlier in the season in Evanston. Illinois is 7-3. Northwestern is 6-3. And then a bunch of teams at 5-5, Michigan State, Maryland, Nebraska, and Indiana. I think here you're really talking about a 3-team race, Wisconsin, Purdue, and Illinois, which is probably how I honestly would have had it in the preseason, certainly with Purdue and Illinois, and I was relatively high on Wisconsin. Certainly they're at Nebraska on Thursday. Purdue is still, I think, one of the best teams in all of college basketball. I don't think many people would push back on that too much. I mean, Zach Edey is Zach Edey. Braden Smith got snubbed on the Bob Cousy Award watch list, but still, he's one of the probably 5 best point guards in college basketball this season. Lance Jones has come on strong for the Boilermakers of late, giving them a true third scorer there in the backcourt next to Smith and Fletcher Lawyer. You're getting some good things out of Mason Gillis. You're getting some good things out of Trey Kaufman-Wren, Caleb First, all those guys. But Wisconsin, they just keep getting it done. And for everything else happening around college basketball, like I always say, the results have to be the results. And when they just keep stacking wins, yeah, they lost at Penn State a couple of weeks ago now, but they've won 3 straight since then, including a gutsy road win at Minnesota. Took care of business against Michigan State last Friday. This is a team that, contrary to what you would have expected with Greg Gard's group, they maybe have a couple questions defensively, but they're just elite offensively. Right now, 4th in Ken Palm's adjusted offensive efficiency, continuing to score the basketball at a really high level. They play they host Purdue coming up on February 4th. So this weekend, Sunday, that's going to be just a lights out game. Again, we talked about Duke, North Carolina coming on Saturday. We talked about Houston, Kansas coming on Saturday. This one's on Sunday. Another one that's going to tell you a lot about the future of the Big Ten. Purdue trying to pick up a game. These teams still play twice, home and home, down the stretch, but really important game for Purdue. If they can go on the road and win at Wisconsin, then I think they're back in the driver's seat for the league. If Wisconsin takes care of business at home, which they generally do, they just might knock off Goliath this year, which was what we thought Purdue was going to be. Wisconsin's going to put themselves in a very, very good position to win the Big Ten, if they can win against the Boilermakers on Sunday. The Pac-12 conference, the Conference of Champions, as our friend Bill Walton would say, this one's a mess, man. Like there's no clear-cut path for either one, any of these teams as it stands today. Now, I do think Arizona is still the best team and has the highest ceiling, but nobody has separated themselves from the pack, I guess is what I'm trying to say, in the Pac-12. Arizona and Oregon currently 6-3. Colorado and Washington State are now 6-4. Stanford and Arizona State at 5-4. To me, this is about Arizona, Oregon, and Colorado. I still really like this Colorado team. KJ Simpson has been outstanding this year, definitely an all Pac-12 type of player this year. Tristan De Silva has been excellent. Eddie Lampkin has been excellent. And then the freshman Cody Williams, he's back now after missing quite a bit of time from like early December through early January. Struggled in their loss at Washington State the other night, but otherwise has played some of his best basketball recently. I think that the Buffaloes have a real chance to make some noise down the stretch in this conference. They've already gotten their game at Arizona out of the way when they just got blasted in that one. They've already gone to Washington State. They've already got a win over Oregon. So their toughest games the rest of this year, they go to Utah on Saturday. They still have to go to USC, but then they get Arizona at home. I think that there's a path for them forward to get towards the top of this conference, but Arizona, the personnel is the personnel. I think that they, with Caleb Love, Omer Ballo, all those guys, I think they still have the most talent, though it's just been hit or miss with them in this league. I mean, they go on the road and lose to Oregon State. Like, you can't drop very many of those and expect to win this league, but they are lights out at home. I mean, they killed Colorado in that game. They killed USC when they came to town. They just went on the road and won at Oregon on Saturday. So to me, they're in the best position to go forward and win this conference. But I just don't trust any of these teams the way that I probably trust some of the other teams that we've talked about, even teams that might not win it. Like, I trust Wisconsin a heck of a lot more than I trust Arizona. Do I think Wisconsin's going to beat out Purdue to win the Big Ten? I don't really want to sit here today and say yes, but I feel like I know what I'm going to get a lot more out of Wisconsin than I know what I'm going to get out of Arizona. Question again from Travis. I appreciate you chiming in there to the chat. Is this parity or is this a bunch of bad teams? It kind of depends on how you look at it. To me, and I had this conversation with some folks the other day, I think that it's fair to say there's an absence this year of a truly great team. We obviously aren't going to see a team go undefeated. That's already out the window. It has been for like a month now. We aren't going to see teams win, 16 games in their conference and run away with things by mid-February. That's not going to happen. I don't think you're going to go into the NCAA tournament with some team that's like, well, are we going to take blank or the field? Like that ain't going to happen. But I do think we have a larger pool of really good teams. So to answer your question, I don't think it's a bunch of bad teams. I think it is a bunch of really, really good teams. I think there are 12 to 15 legitimate national championship contender level teams. There just isn't that elite team. And then also your bottom teams are much better. Like I think that the 75th best team in the country this year is somewhat substantially better than the average 75th best team from years past. That's just that's what the eye test would tell me. I think there's probably some data to back that up as well. But yeah, I don't think it's a bunch of bad teams. I think it's a bunch of really good teams with the absence of a great team. Wrapping up the discussion with the Southeastern Conference, another one. It works out perfectly to have this discussion today because so many of these races are going to take shape on this coming weekend. Another marquee matchup between two conference favorites on Saturday is the Tennessee Volunteers coming to town in Lexington to face the Kentucky Wildcats. Top 10 matchup between these two rivals is going to be an outstanding atmosphere at Rupp Arena on Saturday. But to go through the standings quickly, Alabama is the team out in front right now. They are 6-1. They have to go to Georgia this evening on Wednesday night. South Carolina picked up a huge win against the Vols last night in Knoxville. So South Carolina is now 6-2. And to me, you can go ahead and ship the National Coach of the Year award, unless the wheels really fall off to Coach Lamont Paris at South Carolina. Just an outstanding job. And so many people continue to wait around. And I think we've done a good job of not doing this. I mean, heck, I told you in the preseason that I thought the South Carolina team was really good. I thought their guard play was going to allow them to win a lot of SEC games. I'm not going to sit here and act like I told you they were going to be competing to win the stinking league. I didn't think they were going to be 6-2 in the SEC going into February. I didn't think they were going to be 18-3. It's a joke this team is not ranked in the top 25 this week. I mean, the way they move some of these teams up, like Florida Atlantic moving up to 20 now or whatever, because they keep beating these, or they keep barely beating these other bad mid-major teams, but South Carolina can't get into the top 25. I don't care what they do on Saturday. If they lose by 27 points on Saturday, they should still rank them next week because they've screwed it up to this point. But people kind of keep waiting for the ship to sink with South Carolina. Lamont Paris just keeps winning games, and it is impressive stuff. To go on the road, I mean, teams are struggling against much weaker competition to go on the road and win at Arkansas, win at Missouri, all these different places. North Carolina goes last night on the road to Georgia Tech and can't win, and South Carolina goes into Knoxville and beats Tennessee at Thompson-Boling Arena. Like, that is impressive stuff. They're 6-2. Tennessee, Auburn, and Kentucky all 5-2. Ole Miss, Coach Chris Beard is now 5-3 after last night's win against Mississippi State. I say all that about South Carolina. I know they've already beaten Kentucky. They've already now gone on the road and beaten Tennessee. I still think this is a Tennessee or Kentucky league. It just seems like they are the teams that are going to be there in the end. When you watch South Carolina, and I've watched them a ton, and I love them. I even have a small personal connection to Coach Lamont Paris. So I do not want to take anything away from the Gamecocks, but there still is just like, they don't have Dalton Knecht. They don't have Antonio Reeves, Rob Dillingham, Reed Shepherd. Maybe they're just going to keep proving me, even me, who's one of their biggest supporters, but certainly everybody else. Maybe they're just going to keep proving everybody wrong. And maybe I'm the sucker for not pushing my chips far enough in on them, because my chips have been in for much of the season. And here I am telling you, well, I don't know if they're actually going to win the conference. But I also don't really trust Alabama still. I just think that the variance, that 3-point shooting stuff, I don't know if it's going to beat the best teams. We already saw it not work against Tennessee. But heavyweight battle in Lexington on Saturday. Kentucky and Tennessee. As a Kentucky fan, kind of hate the Tennessee's coming off a loss, honestly. But I also think that it's a decent spot for Kentucky, who has to play a very good Florida team tonight. Second time around, those two have matched up, so that's going to make that even tougher. Kentucky obviously went down to Gainesville and won to begin SEC play. But I think that I think that Kentucky won't. It won't matter that Tennessee's coming off of a loss as much because though Kentucky may or may not be coming off a loss depending on what happens tonight, but either way, Kentucky had the collapse at the end of the Georgia game a couple weekends ago, or a couple weekends ago. Then they go on the road, lay an egg, lose by 17 at South Carolina. Then they go on the road, start like crap against Arkansas, squeak one out. So Kentucky hasn't played well recently, and luckily they're 2-1 during that stretch of not playing well. But let's face it, they haven't played very well. So they win or lose, they shouldn't be overlooking anybody at this point because they just need to get themselves playing back to playing really well. So if you had to ask me today, I think it's Tennessee or Kentucky. And then guess what? We're going to find out which team can pull a leg ahead this weekend on Saturday. So if you've enjoyed listening to kind of getting the rundown of the top of these Power Six conferences, then you're really going to enjoy Saturday. Because as we mentioned again, Duke and North Carolina play each other, Houston and Kansas play each other, Kentucky and Tennessee play each other. So we get some big time matchups in these big major conferences. By no means, I mean, at no point this season, probably until the final week, probably even the final game, are we going to really know what's going to happen. Because if this season has taught us nothing, it's that always expect the unexpected. Every game is going to be tough to win, and people are going to start dropping some games that they quote unquote shouldn't drop. So you're never going to be able to say, well, they're in the driver's seat. They're definitely going to win this conference. They're going to start to pull away with it. It's just not going to happen this year. But some teams can start to put themselves in the driver's seat a little bit and give themselves maybe room to drop one this weekend, depending on who comes out on top in some of these big marquee matchups. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Thanks to those who jumped into the chat to ask some live questions. That's what this platform is all about. That's why we do this, is to interact with the viewers via the live chat. If you're watching this in the future, please leave a comment or find me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Happy to answer your questions there. Subscribe to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show here on YouTube for these live Wednesday episodes of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Also find the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show on Spotify or wherever you do listen to your podcast episodes. You can find me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR and enjoy this evening and the rest of the week of college basketball. Have a good one.